I have to bring up the cost to it, right? Whoever is a techie and loves technology is going to be like, "Ooh, that sounds interesting. Let me build this one amazing Uber knows everything, does everything right model." And if you say, "Okay, even if I did, what would it cost me to run?" Right? So the kobolds, when they come and say, "I'm going to build this," it's like, okay, who's going to pay for it? Um, we could take 50% of your salary to keep it running, and then slowly, or they'll be quickly saying, yeah, maybe no. Let's think this through.
Welcome to the Information Week Podcast. I'm your host, Senior Editor Zhao Pierre Ruth, and today's episode we are taking a look at where does it make sense for smaller AI models to be put into use within your organization? Right now there is an urge to make the most of AI. It's pretty widespread, but organizations might be a bit unsure about the scale and scope of the models that they might be looking to in order to deliver on what the technology can offer, or at least hopefully can offer it to them. In some cases, smaller AI models might be useful for some fine-tuned specific purposes, though there may be some trade-offs in looking to them versus just diving in with a large language model or larger models. So to explore this, what makes sense and might not make sense when deploying smaller AI models, we are joined today by Amol Ajgaonkar, CTO of Innovation for Insight Enterprises. And we are once again joined by a friend of the show, Pierre DeBois, CEO of Zimana Analytics. Pierre, Amol, thank you so much for being here today.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, Amol, let's start off with you. Let's talk about what are some non-obvious differences working with LMs versus smaller AI models that you've come to realize. The top level kind of thought is like, okay, it's small, it'll be more efficient, but what are some underlying things that might not be as immediately noticeable by looking to a smaller AI model?
There are a few operational things that we have to think about when you're using small language models. One of them is the context window, where it's going to run, the mean time to first token, how fast it's going to come in, and so some of those things, plus then choosing the small language model itself, like what is your purpose? It's not a large language model. It's not that broad. So, understanding the accuracy of it, or when I say accuracy, the quality of the output, right? For the use case that you want. So there are a couple of decision points that you have to take into account before you dive into and say, oh yeah, small language model will work. Understand why you're using it, for what you're using it, what is the speed that you require when, for that use case, and then where are you going to run it, right? And so when you consider these, that is when you'll get a clearer picture on what small language model do you want to use. Do you want to fine tune it or just use off the shelf some of the small language models that are there, and then dive into it? If you just say, oh, I'm going to use small language models and I'm going to pick the first one that's in there and start using it, you're going to be in a world of pain or a lot of money down the drain. One of those two, or both.
Gotcha. Let's take it a bit further. With the adoption of large language models, LLMs, that can run into various roadblocks in their use. Is it just kind of naturally easier to incorporate smaller AI models into the kind of workflow? Is it less of a lift? Is it not as intrusive to include?
Not really. I mean, that's the perception that people are, oh, it's a small language model, I'm just going to run it and it's easier to run. That is when you go back to where are you going to run it? And what framework are you going to use to run it? So are you going to use, let's say, like Olama to run it, or some other framework, or you're going to host your own? Is the API going to be open AI compatible API? Or is it something different? Because that determines how you're going to integrate with it, what kind of effort is going to be needed to integrate your existing applications or newer applications to run with it as well. And then essentially, when you get to consume the output of it, what are the different capabilities of that? Does it support streaming? Is it always like, hey, here you go, I'll give you the output when I'm done? Does it support JSON outputs? Does it support, Markdown? Like all of that will come into play. So it's not necessarily, easier. The large language models running in the cloud, they're pretty standardized, right? So, and the API endpoints and those are also standardized. So you could, or you can, in theory and in every practicality, just switch between those as long as it's supporting the open AI API spec. But when it comes to small language model, if you do choose a framework that supports the open AI API spec, then nothing changes. It's just a matter of when am I running it, expose that API securely, and you can start using it.
Can smaller AI models be too small to the point where they're not really delivering enough to kind of justify their inclusion and use? I mean, they couldn't come to a point where someone say, "Well, why don't I? It's only doing that. Why can't I just do things the old way or whatever other resources I was using prior to introducing a smaller AI model?"
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great point. Is everybody gravitates towards AI models or small language or large language models. But there are a few things that you can actually just do the old-fashioned, code it out, right? It's a mathematical problem that you can solve. It's a workflow orchestration. That's a simple one that you can solve where the steps are fixed and you know what's going to happen one after the other. You don't need AI models for that. Or if the data is extremely structured and put in place and that is exactly how I'm going to get it, great. Don't go towards an AI model just because it's cool or just because everybody's doing it, right? There are use cases for it. So even if it's a small language model, it might have a smaller footprint, doesn't mean you need to use it. Because there could be latency. Every time you're making a call, there's something happening and you're getting a response back. Now, if the response is not what you need, you're going to call it back again, or you're going to fall back into a different model and all of that. So those considerations when you're looking to either build, integrate, improve, optimize your processes, those are the things that have to be taken into consideration. And the question should always be, can I just solve it by pure, old style, hey, I'm going to solve this using an algorithm, using a method? Great, do it. If there is true, in terms of an input, if it's not that straightforward, if it's not structured, it could be in 5 different ways. There's a human in there that's going to say one thing one way, or some other human is going to say it the other way. Or some other systems, you've got 5 different systems. Each system is providing an output in a different way. And now you have to figure out where that output came from, only extract certain things, classify it. Great choice for an AI use case. Use the AI model and then choose the model based on what your use case is. But that should not be your default, option, is to just say, let's use AI.
Gotcha. Right. All right, Pierre, let's talk a bit about the operational side of things. Can it seem like companies, missing out on resources and capabilities, relative to the competitors by using a smaller AI model? That's like you're using a smaller one, but the other, folks are out there are all talking about their LLMs. Can it feel like you're not making use of all the resources out there?
There can be a little feeling of FOMO in some instances, but honestly, most times the capabilities of these small language models is really, really robust, particularly if you're considering specific applications. If you're looking at things such as visualization, for example, you're doing a lot of images and you're trying to iterate on these images to create some sort of decisions on it, or say video or something with streaming. There are a ton of small language models available now, and you can download and play with with those and kind of develop your own environment, so to speak, basically. And I think that part is the exciting part for most people. I think it's exciting enough where if they're not using Chat GPT, if they're not using something that's been, like they say, Claude, using that API. And Claude's really good, by the way, too. But I think there's a lot with the smaller ones now that the capability is so robust that you have a fighting chance to build the environment you want to build and not really feel like you're missing out. And I think that's where where the savvy players are starting to learn right now.
Gotcha. Looking at costs, are smaller AI models kind of like the magical answer to some of the overall cost concerns that are associated with supporting some of the large language models?
I would say there's a yes and no to that. And that's true for a lot of technology. We hear the word small and we're used to this idea that somehow smaller just means that you're being more efficient. You look at cars, for example, with smaller engines. But these days, smaller engines on a vehicle is turbocharged. They've been refined to be much more powerful and efficient. And we're going to see a lot of that with the small language models in a similar sense because so many people are looking to develop an environment around those models, whether it's adding a RAG or MCP. And I think, as mentioned before, a lot of the things like latency and inference, those sort of things are, there's a chance for efficiency. But again, you're talking about a system where you need to arrange things pretty well. There's still gotchas that can come up quite a bit that might actually drive your cost a little higher than what you expect. So a lot of that cost savings really has to be from a savvy knowledge of how your system's operating, so you can help manage the tokens around that system and be much more efficient in the long run.
Yeah, and JP, just to add to that, it does come down to sometimes understanding your user base and how many requests are going to come per second, what would be the size of the request, and all of that, because if let's say you're running a really small language model and you're getting X number of requests and you're like, oh, great, this is, costing me $50 a day. Amazing. Like everything's taken care of. And suddenly you get a spike and you get 1,000 users and you have put it on auto scale and suddenly your infrastructure has scaled out and you're not using more. If it's containerized, your replicas, everything is out there. Well, the cost just went up, right? Because now you're using it, or you've updated the RAM. If it's running in the cloud, or if it's running on-prem, you might actually run out of space, and now your users are not getting the output. They don't really care whether you're using a small language model or a large language model. They just care about the output. They care about what they're there to do. So it's a little bit. I think that is what Pierre is saying. The yes and the no. Part of it, it's a little bit of like, hey, it's nuanced.
Speaking of output and nuance, let's talk a bit about the effect of industry peer pressure or even customer pressure in terms of like the perception of like saying that, hey, our organization is using a smaller AI models versus there might be at least a perception that organizations need to all be using the LLMs to do everything because like that's what the big guys do. That's what everyone, that's where all the flash and energy seems to be going around, at least in the conversation that we're seeing these days. So by using smaller AI models, is that a way to kind of like show that you're working efficiently, or can, in some ways, depending on who's paying attention, speak to somebody who might say, well, that's showing that your organization has limitations and what you can actually, you have the means to make use of different AI models.
Yeah, I think it's less perception and more of a operational reality for businesses to use a small language model. It's not like again, I'm going to use the automotive one. I have to go back to my years from at Ford. It's not like you have a large engine. You say, hey, we have the Hemi, or hey, we have this large engine in a truck. Your customers don't care to that much extent. They're more concerned about the performance of the model more than anything else. I think for a business that's using a small language model, it may be more in terms of, just in terms of capacity, where that model is run. I think is going to be a bigger play. Can we use that model in such a way that our customers can still get what they need, but at the same time, we're able to deliver. I think AI still has that. This may sound odd, but I think it's still new in a lot of ways. I think we're not quite at that nuanced. I don't think we're quite there yet. The closest I can give to you is probably what's happening right now with Apple, because now Apple have decided to partner with Google, and Google will come up with a unique model that will run for Siri. But I think in those situations, it's probably it was probably that plays well for large, but I think for a smaller one, I don't think that it's that cuts that deep.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your insights on those questions. All right. So for those who are listening and those who can see, the Ninja Turtles game screen is out. It's time for my favorite part of the show. It is time for questionable ideas, the tabletop exercise where our esteemed panelists will be put through a set of scenarios as interim executives for a fictional company called Questionable Ideas. These scenarios were not shared in advance and are intentionally over the top. My guests are not responsible for the shenanigans, goblins, gremlins, and kobolds in these scenarios. This is all my fault. And for those of you checking in for the first time, the goblins represent elements who are very interested in new flashy technology and will run amok with it as quickly as possible. Kobolds represent some of the older school perspective because they're still thinking about very old school programming languages. And the gremlins are all about chaos and just kind of breaking things. Move fast and break stuff. Whether or not it works, something happened. Something interesting will happen. Okay, so Amol, Pierre, again, you'll be acting as interim CEOs for this fictional company. You'll have these, same authority and executive powers that you would, but just as interim executives for Questionable Ideas. Okay, are you ready? Okay, great. All right, first scenario for us. Questionable Ideas needs to level up to match its rivals who allegedly are killing it with AI to help them scale up. Your in-house developers are testing the waters with smaller AI models, but the goblins in the company want to flood the company with small AI for everything, from controlling the faucets in the washroom to email and messaging. Other employees are pushing back at being forced to adopt small AI for everything. Furthermore, the collective scale of the goblins' plan would devour extensive resources in the process. How do you scale up with smaller AI in a meaningful way without burning out in the process? Both of you, please just chime in with your thoughts on that.
So first is the goblins need to be educated on what they can do and they cannot do in a personal capacity. The second is based on saying, when they say AI needs to be used everywhere, that is when I stop them and essentially kind of ask them to rephrase it in front of me again. And if they still do it again, then I need to tell them again in the same conversation, please rephrase it so that they get a hint that what they're saying is wrong. And that is not what I want to hear from them at that point. So I appreciate the enthusiasm that they do have, though. That does help explore the capabilities and the limitations of AI. So when they say, I'm going to use AI for everything, to turning on the faucet, to turning on the light, to when I speak, it's going to write my own email. Great. I love that. Make it do everything, but in a silo, so that you know and learn what the limitations are. You know and understand where and what should be used and how much resources it's going to take. So in fact, I would put them in the small group of folks, give them a nice little boundary that they shouldn't cross, because that crossing that boundary would be, there would be an exit door for them, and let them let loose, go play, do whatever you want, dig holes, take all the bugs out of the earth, fine. That is exactly what we want them to do so that it benefits the company in terms of getting their learnings and then using those learnings to do it right.
And I would say I agree with that. I think you'd have to have that discussion where it's great that people are trying to, like, I want to try everything. And I know the gremlins are really anxious to try everything, but it needs to be structured in a way where there's some priority. You don't want them to try out on sensitive systems that, if they are down, that puts a risk in how you perform. But definitely using these models on smaller systems, I think is, or having I should say, sort of a campus of things that they have access to, in terms of tools, in terms of, even if they're trying to experiment with RAG, for example, with a small model, those sort of things, having some sort of, a small campus of ideas is important, because then you can kind of control the rollout much more easily rather than going everywhere and anywhere all at once and running into risk.
Okay. On to scenario 2. The kobolds crawl out of their data vault with their own solution to the smaller AI sprawl that the goblins have spawned. The kobolds propose the creation of one final AI, a master LLM to rule them all over all smaller AI models in a hybrid system. The one LLM will give its user the power to control, contain, and shut down the smaller AI models without any discussion or oversight from any humans or anyone else. The one LLM would, of course, be encoded by the kobolds in the deep magic only they know. How do you manage the spread of smaller AI without shutting down and controlling development the way that the kobolds are proposing, like Sauron in the One Ring?
I'll jump in a little bit. I'm a little concerned on the one. When I hear that, I guess I get pause and get chills. I'm sort of interested more in the having a mixture of agents, basically, that are kind of coordinated, rather than having one deciding that everything should be shut down. Depends on the number of systems, depends on the number of tools. You need to have a federation of agents in what you're trying to do. And I would rather see that rather than like the one, Sauron with the evil eye watching us all and ready to stop our agents. So that's my quick 2 thoughts on it.
I have to bring up the cost to it, right? Whoever is a techie and loves technology is going to be like, "Ooh, that sounds interesting. Let me build this one amazing Uber, knows everything, does everything right model." And if you say, "Okay, even if I did, what would it cost me to run?" Right? So the kobolds, when they come and say, "I'm going to build this," it's like, okay, who's going to pay for it? We could take 50% of your salary to keep it running, and then slowly, or they'll be quickly saying, yeah, maybe no. Let's think this through. I think to Pierre's point, having agents and having an agent assigned maybe a small language model or a large language model, or somewhere in the middle, that is appropriate for it. And then every agent is assigned a budget and a cost to understand, how much are we spending on that and what value is it bringing. And having that conversation with the kobolds, most of the times, though they are disappointed that they will not get to build this uber massive, amazing LLM or a model, I think they'll understand the intricacies and the cost implications of doing something like that as well.
Well, the kobolds are disappointed that they're not able to establish the black gates of Mordor and have the tower looking over everything and shutting down the smaller AI models the way they wanted to. They've already started scripting the black speech into their robes. Okay, on to the last scenario. The gremlins, who are distinctly different from the goblins, the gremlins think questionable ideas should go even further with its smaller AI models, and they want to push them out to customers for even more than chatbots. The gremlins want to require customers, in fact, to let the company's smaller AI models inside their smartphones, their laptops, and other devices in order to access their personal data as resources. They say it's best not to specify what data is being accessed, especially even in the terms of service. That way, the smaller AI can access whatever it needs, whenever it wants, without putting a direct strain on questionable ideas. How do you establish parameters for smaller AI models while ensuring they can access resources that they need to be effective? And as you're thinking about this, you're pretty sure you're hearing your legal team gagged or muffled in the back by the gremlins, because this is obviously a not good idea.
I would, in fact, take this one as a personal failure if I have these questionable people in the company that I hired. But let's say they are in there, they've managed their way through in. It is a massive liability issue and has to be thought through very carefully, not just from a let's put it in the terms of service, because how many times has any user read any terms of service until something comes out in the open and then they start going like, oh my God, they've said this, right? So this is where I feel there is a little bit of ethics that actually have to come through, and personal ethics have to come through. It's like, hey, we will not do this. Or if we decide that, hey, for the outcome that we are promising the customer, we need a certain amount of data or type of data, then we have to make it up front and center that will pop out to the user and say, hey, we want to access this, this, and this. We understand this is private information, and hence we are using a small language model that will be running on your machine itself. Maybe it's on the phone, maybe it's on your laptop. At that point, to process your information more securely as well as effectively, so that it doesn't leave the boundary of your machine. So having said that, do we have permission to use that data? They say yes, great. If they say no, then we essentially say, well, then we cannot provide you the outcome that you're looking for because we need this data at that point. And so I think it comes down to being able to very clearly articulate to the user what we are going to use, where are we going to process it, how are we going to process it, and making it very clear to them how that's going to happen would help us navigate all the legal troubles that will come later if we were to blanket, just we can use whatever we want on that machine. So.
I agree also on the data. It's quite a bit. In fact, I imagine a lot of data analysts also being kind of tied up in with the lawyers as well too. So much of things with AI, we have a lot of hand wrangling about what AI can do, but it really starts with the data and the permission, particularly as you're trying to establish some sort of systems for using an AI model. Whether it's putting data within a RAG that is supposed to access at some regular issue, or maybe there's data that's being accessed through a tool. Understanding that access and understanding the permission points is extremely important now, because that gives an idea of what you can and can't do ultimately.
Well, the kobolds still think that using the Black Gates of Mordor to shut all of this down is probably the best option, at least from their perspective. Of course, that would mean that they would have the one LLM mastering everything. Well, gentlemen, Amol, Pierre, thank you very much. You've been great in offering your insights and halting the shenanigans and nonsense for questionable ideas, and also giving our audience some good ideas on how to think about considering way their approach to smaller AI models in their organizations. Appreciate you both coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, JB. This was fun.
This was enjoyable. Love being here. So thank you.